Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4 through 8. I want to welcome you guys who are watching to the Bible study podcast. I want to first say thank you to the class, the Bible study class that's here. Come on, give yourselves a hand. All right. So if you hear some witnesses on the camera, that's just our people in the Bible study. I want to say thank you guys for coming. But thank you guys for watching, however you're watching, or if you're listening, I want to say thank you for including me into your day. Today is a great lesson. We have the last lesson from the book of Habakkuk. Now, we haven't even really touched the parts that I wanted to get to, and I don't think we're going to get all the way there, but when you have time, go back and study this book. But today we're going Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4 through 8. Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4 through 8. I'm reading out of the New King James Version, all right? And so, I'm just going to read. It says, Habakkuk chapter 2, beginning at verse number 4. Behold, his soul which is lifted up, the proud, his soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by faith. Indeed, because he transgresses by wine, or he fools himself by wine, he is a proud man, and he does not stay at home, because he enlarges his desire as hell, and he is like death and cannot be satisfied. He gathers to himself all the nations, and heaps up for himself all peoples. Will not all these people take up a proverb against him, and a taunting riddle against him, and say, woe to him who increases what is not his. How long? And to him who loads himself with many pledges. Will not your creditors rise up suddenly? Will they not awaken who oppress you? And you will become their loot. I think in the King James that's become booties unto them. That's plunder or loot. Because you have plundered many nations, all the remnant of the people shall plunder you. Because of men's blood and the violence of the land and the city of all who dwell in it. All right, and so today's lesson, I don't really have a title for it, but if I was going to give a title to it, I would call it Pride is a Problem. Pride is a problem. All right, and so in this fourth lesson from the book of Habakkuk, I just want to walk you up. If you haven't been listening, this is your first lesson listening to. This is God responding to Habakkuk. Habakkuk asks God the question, why does evil win? Why does it seem like the righteous always have to go under while the evil men seem to go ahead? So he asked God these questions, and that was in lesson 1. And then we talked about how God responded to Habakkuk by saying to him, all of the evil that you see will be judged. I have a plan to judge the evil. It looks like evil is winning, but I have a plan to judge the evil on the land, right? He says he's going to use the nation, the Chaldeans, which is the Babylonians. They were an evil nation. Then Habakkuk comes back and asks God the question, God, if you are just, God, if you are righteous, how can you allow this evil nation to be used as an instrument to judge righteous people? And so what God does is, this is God responding to Habakkuk's second question. God, how could you be a just God and allow this evil nation to judge us who are a righteous nation? And I pointed out where I'm going to start at to this afternoon. What I pointed out was that God can use evil to accomplish his purpose. The saying is that Satan is the rod of God. And sometimes God will allow enemies, and this is what he does with the nation of Israel. He allowed their enemies to destroy them or to take them into captivity, because God can allow your enemies to get victory over you when you walk outside of his will. Things that are not supposed to win in your life start winning in your life when you allow sin to control your life. Did you hear what I said? Things that are not supposed to win in your life, God will allow them to win in your life when you walk outside of his will. Yeah. And so we pointed out on last week that God can use this enemy nation as his instrument, but that does not stop them from being judged. And so what God does for Habakkuk is he's letting Habakkuk know that he sees the evil that they have. He sees who they are. It's not like God is just going to use them without him having the knowledge of who they are, but he sees who they are. He sees the evil in their heart. He lets Habakkuk know that he sees the Chaldeans for who they are. Why does that stand out to me? It stands out to me because God expresses a knowledge of a nation, of a people who have no knowledge of him. They don't care about God, but God still sees and knows who they are. That stands out to me because what it says about God is it says that God pays attention to everything that's happening in the world. You don't have to be saved for God to know who you are, right? You gotta know who he is for you to enter into the kingdom, but he knows who you are. And I want to start by pointing out the omnibenevolence of God. The omnibenevolence of, not the omnibenevolence, the omniscience of God. I'm sorry. The omniscience of God, that God knows everything. The Bible teaches you that God knows everything at all times, that there is not a conversation that God does not hear. There is not an action that God is not paying attention to. And let me encourage you, if God has knowledge of people who don't care to know him, how much more does God have an intimate knowledge of those who put their faith in him? I want you to pay attention to that. God knows this nation, even though they don't serve him, they don't care to know him, they don't want to know him. God has intimate knowledge of who they are. God knows. And if there was a number one point tonight, I want you to hear me when I say that God knows. God knows things about your life that you probably don't know about your own life. I want to stress that God knows. If God has the knowledge of a nation that does not know him, imagine how much more God knows about you. And I want you to take that with you home today. If you are listening to me online, I want you to hear Minister Marcus say that God knows. Did you know that God knows who hurt you? God knows who said things about you. God knows who's been plotting against you. God knows what life took from you. God knows what made you sad. God knows what made you put your walls up. God knows what made you close yourself off. God knows the things that hurt you. I want to stress that God knows, because sometimes the devil will make it seem like you're going through what you're going through all by yourself. I have to remind myself of that God sees me in my frustration. God understands me in my lonely places. God understands my frustration. He knows the things that I'm going through. He understands my sadness when I have to get sad. And I want you to get that God pays attention. He pays attention to the things that happen in your life. He knows how to shape you and make you become a vessel usable in his hand. Why? Because he knows you. He understands how life made you turn out. He understands why things made you mean. And this is why most of the time when you come to church, you hear the preacher say, if you just come to God, if you just turn it over to God, if you just allow God to come in, God knows how to help you because God knows what hurt you. Are you hearing what I'm saying? God knows, he understands. And I like it because when God talks to Habakkuk about knowing this nation, he doesn't just speak about surface level stuff, that their eyes are green. He don't just say that their skin color is a certain color. He talks about what's in their hearts. It shows that God knows details. Did you know that God knows details? Not just that God pays attention to the events of your life. And this is what Jesus says. Jesus says that not even a sparrow falls without God knowing. And you know the song that says, if his eyes on the sparrow, I know he watches me. In other words, the psalmist said, if God takes the time to pay attention to what happens to a bird, I know that God is paying attention to what happens to me. But beyond that, he sees beyond the surface level. So he pays attention to the events of your life. But then he talks about what's going on in their hearts. And it shows that God pays attention to the details. I want y'all to get this. Imagine the kind of God that would create you a specific way. Right after that, Jesus says that God knows the number of hairs on your head. That means that God is detailed down to the science. Have you ever considered that God knows the intimate details about you, not just the events that happen in your life, but he understands how you are made up. Imagine that a God could put your body together right, in such a way that the ribs come around a certain way, the intestines go together a certain way, the lungs fit together, the bones come together, and the nerves in the spine are so intricately woven, and nobody puts you together. You come like naturally made like that. That God pays attention to the, have you ever considered that God has paid so much attention to the details of your life? You cannot let the devil make you think that God does not know what's going on, and you can't let the devil make you think that God don't know how to fix what's going on, because God pays attention to the details. He pays attention to the details of your life. And this is why I tell you to trust God. You have to trust that God knows as you walk with him. You have to trust that God knows as you trust him to guide your life, because he pays attention to the details. And so my number one has to be, you have to learn to trust God's omniscience. Trust that God knows. And the reason why you ask God for guidance is because he knows better than you know. The reason why you go to God for clarity is because he understands you better than you understand yourself. And sometimes I tell God, this is what I want, but you know what's best. Have you ever found yourself praying that? And I have to say, this is why this nevertheless prayer of Jesus always comes to my mind. It's nevertheless, God, I want this, but nevertheless, you have to show me, because sometimes, how many times have you got something that you thought you was really going to enjoy, something that you thought was really going to be right for you, something that you thought was really going to do you good, and you got it and it was underwhelming because it wasn't what you thought it was going to be. And a lot of times, what we don't recognize is that God is so omniscient that he knows what's right for you. Have you considered that God knows you down to the intricate details? That means God knows who is right for your life. That means God knows what's best for your life, the kind of job that you should have, the kind of things that you should be studying, the kind of things that you are engaging yourself in. I hope you hear what I'm saying, that God pays attention to the details and God knows what's best. You have to trust that God knows what's best. You have to trust that God knows when to bless you. You have to trust that God knows who is right for your life. You have to trust that God knows what is right for your life. Understanding that the God you serve knows the events and he knows the details. Now get this. What it says is, he says that the Chaldeans, this is what he says, that his soul which is lifted up. The Chaldeans had become proud. And first we see that God knows them intimately. Then this is what he says about them. So he shows that he knows them, and this is what he knows about them. That their hearts were lifted up. That their hearts were lifted up. This is what it says. Behold, his soul which is lifted up. God calls out their pride. His soul is lifted up. The Chaldeans thought that they were getting victory because of their own strength, not realizing that God had ordained it to be so. They thought they were getting victory because they were strong, not recognizing that God had prophesied through Isaiah, had prophesied through Jeremiah, that the Babylonians were going to rise to power. And I want you to pay attention to that, because sometimes the things that go right in your life, it's easy for you to take the credit for them, not recognizing that maybe God had something to do with it. And I tell people this all the time. I don't just praise God for my accomplishments. I praise God that God gave me the strength to accomplish it. I thank God for his strategy to accomplish it. Of course I know that I did it, but I don't act like that it was just me by myself. I recognize that it was me and God. And I want you to hear me when I say that you got to understand that the things that go right in your life, yes, you had something to do with it, but don't discredit God has something to do with it. And I like to stress that. But the Chaldeans, their soul had got lifted up. And I want you to think of this swelling. I want you to think of this swelling up. They swelled up. The Chaldeans had come to trust in their own strength because of their victories, and they had become puffed up in their own minds. And this is how how the devil works. The devil puts thoughts in your mind that your accomplishments are because of you and you alone. Why does he do that? Because he wants your inner man to swell up so big that there is no more room for God. He wants your head to get so big that there is no more room for God. Because he knows you without God is an easy target. The only way, I want you to consider this, just as long as the devil has been around, he can outsmart you. The devil knows tricks, things about you. I heard one of the ladies in our service, she told me after church, she said, God knows you, but the devil watches you. God knows you, but the devil watches you. He's watching your patterns. He's watching your weaknesses. He's watching your weak points. He's watching those things that make you trip. He's watching those things, and he sets traps for you because he's watching you and he's paying attention to you. And anytime he makes you swell up so big in yourself that you think you don't need God, you become an easy target for the devil. And this is how the devil makes you. This is what his soul got lifted up. They got puffed up. They got swole up within themselves because of their victories, not recognizing that God had something to do with it. And I want you to take just 1 second, because we're in Bible study. We was at church, we had some church right there. But I want you to take 1 second just to thank God. Yes, God, you did it through me, but you did have something to do with that victory. It was you and me. It was me. But then at the same time, it was also you. And so sometimes you have to remind yourself that yes, I did it, but God helped me do it. But the devil, his trick is to make you think that it was all you. And he wants you to exclude God out of your mind to make you start to swell up in your mind about yourself. And I want to point this out to you. Many times, accomplishments, successes, and victories, if you are not careful, they make you swell up in yourself to make you think you're stronger than who you are. You're bigger than what you are. You're better than what you are because of the things that you were able to accomplish. And sometimes you exclude God. But the truth of the matter is that your accomplishments do not make you bigger. They only make you look bigger. Your accomplishments, victories don't make you better. They only make you look better. It's a facade. I want you to catch that the most famous person in the world who I remember was Michael Jackson. And he had all of the money, but guess what? He was no better or no worse when death came. Why? Because it made him look bigger, but he was the same size. It made him look better, but he was just like every one of us. He had 2 legs, he had 2 feet, he had 2 hands. And I'm not saying that to discredit him. I just want you to understand sometimes the facade of success and the devil will make you think that you're bigger and that you're better or that you're more accomplished. Maybe you are more accomplished, but that does not make you bigger or better than anybody. But if you're not careful, the devil can trick your mind into making you think that you're better. And then you start to swell up, right? You start to swell. And this is what the devil wants to do. You don't understand that the trick of the devil is to make you swell within yourself. And this is what the devil had done to the Babylonians. He made them swell. He made them swell. And he wants to make you get so big within yourself that there is no room for God. But the problem with that is just because you make yourself think that you're bigger does not mean that you're any stronger. It does not mean that there is no more substance. And it's his job to make you swell, right? And normally when you see something swelling on your arm, or you see a swelling going on your foot, it's not a sign that it's stronger, right? It's a sign that something is wrong. And here's the issues. The issue is that on the inside it's the same thing. When you start to get the big head, you start to swell. Now get this, it's the devil's job to make you swell, but God wants to make you grow. I want you to catch that. The difference between swelling and growing is swelling can happen fast, but growth takes time. And sometimes the devil will trick you because you have a lot of things happen really good, really fast, and make you think that it's you, but not recognizing that just because things go up quickly does not mean that it's necessarily going up the healthy way, the right way, the most productive way. And if he can get you to swell up in yourself, right, and he can get you to swell up, you're not recognizing that something is wrong. Anytime I remember when we used to take care my father, his hands would swell up, and it was just a sign, and his dad was something is wrong. And I wish we would do that same thing in the character when you start to see people swell up. It's not that things are going good, it's to be cautious, because just like the devil, God wants you to grow, the devil wants you to swell. And this is what he said. They had got puffed up, they had got swole up, and sometimes we don't want to take God's way, the growth way, because the growth way takes a little bit more time. The devil will make you swell up real quick, but God's growth takes time. And then get what it says. It says his soul is lifted up. His soul is lifted up. Then it said his soul which is not upright in him. And what it does is it shows you how pride, when you leave it inside, has the ability to warp your character, has the ability to twist your character. It shows how pride warps and twists your inner being. And the devil intends, and you don't get this, that the more you allow those thoughts to linger within your heart, that you are all this and you are all that. And I want you to get this. It's nothing wrong. And this is why Paul says that every man should have a measure of faith, not thinking of himself too highly of himself than he ought to. It's nothing wrong with understanding that you have something to do with your life's accomplishments, but you cannot exclude God. But when you leave pride inside, it begins to warp and twist your character. And this is why David prayed, Psalm 19, I believe is verse 13. Keep back thy servant from presumptuous sins. It is these sins of pride that make me think I deserve things that I don't deserve. It makes me want to go after things that I shouldn't be going after. It twists me and makes me think I'm better than this. Have y'all ever seen that a person, and I have to tell people this all the time, that success does not mean that you have to be mean to people. When God blesses you, that don't mean that you have to start talking down on people. But sometimes you get twisted within yourself because you allow that pride to stay in there. But David prayed that God keep him from presumptuous sins, because he understood the damage that pride does from the inside. And so David gives us a good practice as far as praying against pride. But God says his heart is twisted up inside of him, but the just shall live by faith. And I believe it's God's way of contrasting the godless nation against the godly nation. Right? It's God contrasting the faithful and the faithless. Because the faithless trust in themselves, but the faithful trust in God. The unjust trust in themselves, but the just trust in God. The just shall live by faith. And I like that God uses the contrast, because it seems like that this verse does not go with it. But if you really consider it, it is God saying they think that their strength is what's going to keep them at the top. But the just shall live by faith. I'm going to show them that no matter how strong they think they are, I can still bring them down. The godless trust in themselves because their soul is lifted up, but the just trust in God. The godly believe that their accomplishments come from them, but the godly understand that God makes things happen behind the scenes. And this is what he says, that the just shall live by faith. To live by faith is not putting value in the accomplishment itself, but is giving praise to the God who made it possible for you to accomplish it. And it's understanding that you by yourself is not the only one that's making your life work, but it's God that is helping you. And I want to say this before I move on, and I'm watching my time, but I want to say this. I want you to consider that with everything that you accomplish in your life, it makes you look bigger, but you're really the same size. But sometimes what God does is he'll put his magnifying glass over you so that you look bigger. He'll put his magnifying glass over you so that you look bigger, so that it seems like there is something special about you. And if you start to believe the hype, you'll fool yourself, only for God to remove the magnifying glass, and then people around you will see you are the same as the rest of all the rest of us. And I love that, because sometimes what God does is he makes you look bigger so that doors can open for you, so that opportunities present themselves to you, but you're not realizing that that's God's favor over your life. And so it shows how pride distorts. It shows how pride distorts the desire. Get this in 4 and 5. This is what it says. Indeed, he is, because he transgressed by wine. I'm watching my time. I'm not going to take too much time. I'm going to stop right here because I'm watching my time. But what it says is he enlarges his desire. And remember what I said earlier. What pride does is pride makes you think that you deserve things that you don't deserve. It makes you think that you're supposed to have stuff that you're not supposed to have. It makes you want thing, and this is what it said. He enlarges his desire. It's the just shall live by faith. Faith says that I understand that my blessings come from God, and so I learn no matter what to be content. But when pride is the guide, it distorts your desire. It makes you want more, where what you have is not enough. Have you ever seen that, where pride makes a person it's not enough? It's not enough for you to get the promotion. Now you got to throw your weight around. It's not enough for you to have the good stuff, but now you got to tell everybody and gloat about it. You know, it's not enough to win, but now you got to gloat about it. Now you got to say it extra 2 cents. And this is what it said. He enlarges his desire. In other words, he is not satisfied because nothing was enough. He didn't just get some people. He got us to himself all nations, and heaps up for himself all peoples. He don't just want what he's supposed to have. He wants the world. He wanted everything. He wanted to have it and stick his chest out about it. And I watch so many movies, and the only time that the criminals, now you know the criminals supposed to lose anyway, but when the criminals really get caught is when they start going after stuff that they should not have been going after, because you should have just been content. But I want you to consider how sometimes you don't realize that pride is this subtle guide in your mind to make you go after things when you should just be content, to make you go chasing after stuff when you should just thank God for what you have, to make you want to do extra stuff instead of just being content. And I want you to get this. What it says is, at the end of that, and this is why we read it all the way down, and I'm not going to get to the woe because my time is up. But here's what it said. It said that ultimately what pride does to you is seeds of your own destruction. And the devil plants these seeds of pride in your heart. And what they do is, when they start to grow, they grow to your own destruction. And this is what he was saying about the Chaldeans. God was saying that what I'm going to do, they don't realize that their destruction is already living inside of them. And I want you to hear me when I say this as I come to a close. I want you to hear me that the things sometimes you don't recognize, the pride is already in there. Your job is to get it out. This is why David says, God, keep me from presumptuous sin, because pride is the thing that you don't see and that you don't hear. It makes you feel good when you think of yourself a certain way, but you have to remember to humble yourself. All right, and so that's all I have for you guys this afternoon. Come on, let's give God a hand of praise for our lesson. Thank you for coming. I want to say thank you guys for watching. For those of you who want to begin your personal walk with God, all you have to do wherever you are, you can say this to yourself. I believe that Jesus died for my sins, and I believe that God raised Jesus from the dead. And just like that, you are saved. And so with that, if you are online and you are looking for a place to grow your faith, I upload videos for you on YouTube. You can go to our website, tgmchurch.org, and there is a place for you to connect with our church. And so that's all I have for you. I want to say thank you guys for watching. I'll see y'all next week. And I want to say to the class, thank you guys for coming. All right, are there any questions? Are there any... Thank you so much for watching, or if you're listening, I want to say thank you as well. Never miss a Bible study or a sermon when you subscribe. And if you're on YouTube, tap the bell so you never miss when I post.